Some leaders leave footprints, others leave libraries. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Authors on Mission podcast. Today, we're going to be talking with an amazing person. His name is Kevin Brent. He's the founder of BizSmart and author of the Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System. Kevin has transformed hundreds of businesses through his innovative ESUS framework, combining his unique background as an RAF pilot, SED graduate, and a successful entrepreneur. His approach to scaling businesses has earned endorsement from the Scale-Up Institute and helped countless owners and managers navigate the challenging journey from startup to scale up. So without further ado, Kevin, welcome to Authors on Mission podcast.
Fantastic. What a great introduction. And thank you very much for inviting me on, Danielle. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, always. I mean, we love to, invite new entrepreneurs and new authors into this space to talk about, everything from their own journeys to the writing process to what came after the books. And you are perfect for this. And I think we're going to have an amazing conversation about your strategies and everything they've experienced along the way. So I would love to start off today with, would you mind just giving our audience a little bit more background about who you are? I mean, you've done so many amazing things throughout your career. But first off, just let us know how you got to be where you are today, and also what made you decide to write your book.
Okay. So, as you say, I've had quite a varied background from...
A little bit condensed.
Yeah, from the RAF, all sorts of things, building my house in the meantime, INSEAD MBA, and working in the pharmaceutical industry and starting up and running my own businesses. And obviously collected quite a lot of life experiences along the way. And it was actually probably while I was building my own house that I was thinking, okay, when I finish the house, how can I bring all this together and with what I've learned and maybe help others to have some success in business? Because it's a tough gig. It's hard to make it work. And having already at that point set up a couple of my own businesses and found out how hard it was and how different it is really from the big corporate environment, I thought maybe I could help share that. The book came out of after about 10 years really of working with business owners and starting to really try and capture what we did and systemize what we did. That's how the book came to fruition, really, to try and, as I say, capture everything we knew and had learnt into a nice resource.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing that. A great way that a lot of people come up with their ideas is trying to figure out what needs to be put out there. What are some questions that people have? What need can we fill by writing our book and answering those questions? So I'm really glad that you're able to do that. I mean, when I was looking through your book, for example, I noticed that you mentioned only 10% of businesses are good at both strategy and execution. So, I mean, in that way, it kind of relates to the reason why you might have written your book is because a lot of people have trouble with one or the other, for example, right? So I think, perhaps that's another reason why you drew upon that.
Yes, I think it's very much a case of a lot of us are probably better at one or the other. And in order to be successful in business, we need to be able to do both. Of course, strategy is about all the blue sky, the big picture thinking and having a plan as to where we want to get to. But if we can't execute and follow through, then we're not going to get there. And it's not just a case of doing something well once. We've got to keep doing it and keep executing well. And that consistency is hard to do. And some of us are good at that, but equally we can get stuck in the weeds if we're not too careful and never actually lift our heads up and look where we're going. So we've got to be able to combine both those skills. And it's not necessarily natural for all of us, for all the different personality types, to be able to combine those things together.
So why do you think it is so challenging, right? I mean, this goes into the writing industry as well. A lot of people have a strategy or an idea for what they want to write, but they never actually start writing. And, similar into everybody who works with your business, what makes it so challenging? Like, why can't we bridge that gap?
I think it takes different personalities perhaps to do that. So sometimes we can teach ourselves and learn how to be both. Other times we need to understand where we might have weaknesses and we need to plug that gap somehow. That could be with other people, building a team around us that can match our skills, complement our skills. It could be through systems and processes. And one of my challenges, and part of the reason why I built the system as I did, is that I'm not great at doing things more than once. I like to have the challenge, I like to solve a problem, I like to do it, and then I like to move on to something else. And so I built the system around me, if you like, that helps me to make sure I've got something exciting every 90 days, but that I can make sure I'm championing that execution and being really, really focused and getting the right things done on a consistent basis.
And is that kind of what you're going to with their Rhythm 90 system, the 90 days? Is that what you're referring to there?
Yes, and it's interesting because it's really simple. The idea of doing a 90-day planning, we didn't invent that. It's a really simple idea. But with all of the things that we've done with businesses over the years, if a business doesn't have something like that in place, they're unlikely to really go very far. Equally, if they do, then they've got that system in place to do it. And of course, there's 90-day planning and there's 90-day planning. You know, we can do it well and we can do it not so well. But the period itself is fantastic because it's long enough that we can identify and get some biggish things done in the business, not just your little tick box exercises, but we can actually get something meaty done in 90 days. But equally, it's not so far, so long that we're thinking, well, you know, we can just wait and not start yet, you know. So it gives you the impetus and the frequency. And if you run a business in 90-day cycles and you get your team really together and galvanize around what you need to achieve in those 90 days, and you have a structured approach to it, and then you have a rhythm in between to make sure that you're monitoring, keeping on check, making sure you help each other if you come across barriers, then you're much more likely to get things done consistently. And if part of that process is looking ahead and thinking, okay, are we still on track to where we wanted to be getting to in the next 3 years or whatever period it might be, then you're balancing the tactical day-to-day execution with the looking ahead and ticking off some of the big things that need to be done in order to build a scalable business.
Yeah, you know, one thing I noticed that you kept, kind of bringing up is the idea of ticking things off of a checklist, right? And I think that's interesting to think about, especially for authors as well as business people, because, if you're trying to reach a specific goal, whether it be getting your book out there or whatever task you might have at hand, sometimes you just have to, create that list, but make it manageable, right? And just take, one bit after another off of it. And I guess that's perhaps what you're also getting into with the 90-day system. But, before we go into more of the, writing aspect and the book aspect, would you like to kind of spill us in a little bit about another part of your book here, to the 4 fundamental pillars, right? Strategy, people, execution, and cash. So if you don't mind walking us through it a little bit, but also almost with the perspective and that you took when you were expressing it in your book, right? Like, how did you take that fundamental pillar concept and put it into your book in a way that's accessible to readers, in a way that they'd be able to implement it? What kind of strategy?
Yeah, thank you for that. So the strategy, people, execution, cash, a gentleman called Vern Harnish, who wrote Scaling Up, first came up with those aspects. And over the years of working with businesses, we've seen that really all of the challenges really do fall into one of those 4 areas. And we need to be consistently looking at those. And what we did was take those and go, well, okay, well, that's great, but what about strategy? What makes good at strategy or not? What about the people? What about the execution? What about the cash? So we broke each of those 4 areas into 4 or 3 subsequent areas, and then further broke each one into 4 separate areas to make a checklist. And we call it our in-flight checks. And it's essentially consists of 60 questions that we can look at, review on a regular basis, ideally every 90 days, but at least every 6 months with the team. And we can do a benchmarking exercise. And then we can say, well, okay, we all think we're weak in this one area, perhaps. So maybe that should become a priority for the next 90 days to work on that. Or sometimes one of us might think we're quite good at that. And sometimes this is the business owner might think, yeah, everybody understands our strategy or where we're going. And then the rest of the team have scored it low. So we then have a discrepancy. And that equally may be another reason to focus on that particular aspect. But this comes from the idea of checklists, really, rather than to-do lists. But this is, let's have a regular check. And the concept of that, it came from my flying background, I think, and there's various books that have been written around checklists as well, but we would use checklists all the time in flying. And there's great reasons for it, because yes, it's about making sure that we're consistent and we don't miss something, and there's the safety aspect of all of those things. But there's something else which I think people miss, and when people talk about checklists or processes or doing things that consider the same every time, some people think that that means that we're just being automatons and it's not fun anymore, and it is just about, boring, rigid processes and that. But it's the opposite, because it frees up the brain to think about the clever things that we need to do and not be thinking about what's the basics we need to do. So if you think about flying an aeroplane and we have an engine fire, we don't want to be thinking about, well, which switch should I flick off first, and should I do this, and should I make a radio? We want that to be automatic, because if we do that automatically and safely shut down the engine, we can spend all of our time thinking about how we can get the plane safely on the ground. Where are we going to do it? What's happening around? So we can free up our brain from the basic stuff to be creative. And it's the same in business. If we have consistent ways of doing things that mean we don't have errors creeping in all the time, or we keep asking each other, how do we do this, and whatever, we just save that time, then we've got time for all of us to be thinking about how can we improve things? How can we do things better?
Yeah, I mean, in today's day and age, time is the most valuable thing you could ever, hope to have. So by streamlining your processes, by having those checklists, making sure all those little things are taken care of, and it's just a road, that it's already good to go, then you're right. I mean, it's better to focus on, those more important things. I saw a statistic the other day, and forgive me, I don't have it pulled up right now, but it was something along the lines of, we spend 30% of our time doing tasks, right? Like those small things. So, when you're able to make that even faster, you could focus more on that creative aspect, like you mentioned. And, when it comes to writing, that's the most important thing too, right? You want to get the little things out of the way first, like get your outline out of the way, figure out who your target audience is going to be first, right? And then you can actually get into the meat of it, right? So I like that you have that strategy. It applies to everything, I would say, even beyond business.
I think it does. And I think some of that comes from my background in the military and in the Air Force, because again, one of the things that was very clear there was we always knew what the intent was. We knew what the mission was. And if you know what that is, then you can make a roadmap to get there. And if you've got a roadmap, you can put your checklists into the roadmap and things like that. But if you don't have the intent then that other people can see and understand and are bought into, then it's a struggle to get people to go on that journey with you. You've got no clear roadmap, no clear direction, and then you do get people that either are just not motivated, or they're stuck in the weeds because they're just doing routine tasks and they don't see the direction of travel that we're on.
Yeah, I can see how that would really benefit a company in so many ways. Being, the employee mindset, like you mentioned, and also just like streamlining tasks, focusing on more important tasks. And you mentioned your background in aviation and all that a couple of times. Do you want to touch upon that a little bit? How does that influence not only this whole system, which you have touched upon already, but did it have any influence in the way you wrote your book, perhaps, in terms of maybe your experiences? Or
I think all of our life experiences come together to make up what we are, don't they? And how we approach things. So yes, there'll be things from my RAF background that I probably don't even think about that are part of that. But yes, in writing a book or building a business, if we know what the outcome is, what the intent is that we're trying to get to, and then we can be structured and disciplined about how we're going to get there, then that's the key. So writing the book, for example, to a point, I had an advantage over many authors that just start from a blank piece of paper, because we'd been building the system over 10 years or so, as I said. So we'd got elements of the book together that could pull through, but it was then a case of mapping out, what, as you say, what was the book for? Who's the audience? What is it that we're trying to do with the book? And then working back from there. So there's a lovely Stephen Covey quote, one of the 7 habits, isn't there? Start with the end in mind. And it's very much like that. But then that discipline, I set myself, I had a deadline when I wanted the book to be ready. And that deadline was not a publishing date. It was a fact that we'd got a franchisee coming on. And I wanted to have the book there as a really good training resource for the new franchisee. And that was about 4 months away. And I'd already got about halfway through the book at that point. But it then meant I could say, okay, well, I've got to finish it. I've got X number of chapters, which are broken down into the various sections. So I've got to do that amount every week. And if I hadn't done it during the week by finding an hour a day or 2 hours a day to do some writing, then I spent time at the weekend because I knew I had a deadline, and I made, it was a self-inflicted or self-imposed deadline, but it was then that discipline to get it done ready for when the franchisee started.
Well, I mean, first off, I'd like to say I'm loving that you have that goal in mind, right? Some people want to just get a book out there and they want it to happen someday, and then 2 years later, they're still trying to get there. And that's okay, because sometimes you want to make sure it's perfect and refine the idea. But when you set yourself a deadline, especially, when you had an intentional goal, right, to send it to your franchisee to educate them in what you're doing, so important. And I think that's great that you're able to streamline it. Go ahead.
And something else that I think is important, and if we're just doing it in isolation, it can be tricky. We've got to be really, really disciplined, because it will get hard. It does get hard. Everything gets hard at some point. And if we surround ourselves by some other people that are maybe going through the same process that can help us, so maybe when we need a little bit of a lift, somebody else can maybe do that, but equally we can provide that lift to them when they need it. And so peer groups, whether that be in business or whether that be writing groups, author groups, then they can be very helpful as well to help with that motivation, keep the resilience going, and make sure we keep on track to where we're trying to get to.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. You need to make sure that you have a team on your side, whether it's, like you said, a group of other authors or other team members. Or just, in general, Authors on Mission has an amazing team of people. Like, you don't just work with one person, you have a whole collaborative staff. If I'm angel writing for somebody, angel writing is what we call our ghostwriting here, then, there's some other people working on the editing, other people working on the marketing. We collaborate with the client, and, that way you're not only, know that you're in good hands, but you're also kind of held accountable to actually get the writing done. I have some clients who are amazing people. They're very busy, though, and sometimes I have to kind of nudge them and be like, hey, let's look at this chapter together. Do you have a couple minutes, or, that sort of thing. So you have, it's kind of like an added bonus when you have that team with you. I think that's an amazing tip too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Very good.
So, speaking of which, you mentioned you had a team. Did you write it completely on your own, or did you have a little bit of help along the way as well in terms of the writing itself, or?
I authored the book entirely myself, but with a caveat on that. As I mentioned, I wanted it ready for franchisee that came on board. That was our first franchisee. And he had the first draft of that as part of his training. And he then contributed, because of his background, to some other parts of the book as well. So he had a hand in improving it. But then, like you were saying, with the editing team and with the design team, there were people that I had on hand then that helped me with all of those aspects, because I had no idea about self-publishing a book. I had no idea what it would take, what we would need. And I have to say, it still surprises me how much work there was to do after the first draft. So kind of thought, okay, yeah, first draft done in October, we should be published before Christmas. But it was March, I think, before that happened, because there's so much else that needs to be done, as well as obviously the proofreading and the editing and that, but actually, yeah, making sure that you've got everything set up with the publishers and everything as you need it.
I'm curious to know, what took the 4 months between writing and publication? I mean, I know that there are some processes with proofreading, editing, perhaps formatting, design, maybe even copywriting. Was it along those lines, or maybe any other obstacles that came along the way?
No huge obstacles. I mean, because we reference a few other people and frameworks and things like that within the book, then we wanted to make sure that we had approval from them to be able to reference them. So there was a little bit of that, but that didn't take that long actually. But I think it was just the process to make sure that everything was done in the right way and the book was properly registered, properly set up. But there certainly was, at the time between October and Christmas, was primarily about the copywriting and the editing on that, and making sure that my poor English was corrected and I was actually saying what I meant to say.
Yeah, I mean, that's always a factor too. People actually have to understand what you're writing, but thankfully, again, when you have a team of people, especially these days, the amount of resources available, it's nothing to deter people from writing, right?
Absolutely. And also consistency, because when you put something together yourself that maybe you've done over different periods and you brought other things in together in one book, then you may have some inconsistencies through the book or just terminology that's not quite consistent all the way through. So a really good editor can help to pick up on those things and make sure that the whole book flows nicely.
Yeah, definitely. You can't just do it on your own. You have to make sure that you need a second set of eyes, whether it's a beta reader or editor, whoever it is. Now, my other question, we talked about sort of what led you to the book, the writing process. Now I'm curious, once your book has been on the shelves, what sort of differences have you seen since it's been out there? Have you had a lot of people come up to you saying, the book has really helped me, or maybe it led them to your business and what you do? I'm kind of curious, what results did you see?
I think the biggest impact that we've had is the credibility that gives me as an individual, but also the business as a whole. And whenever we use the book, I didn't write the book expecting it to be a huge bestseller and make millions from writing the book. That wasn't the aim. The aim was to have a resource that would add to our credibility that we could then use with prospecting, but also with existing clients. So it helps very much in the initial conversations with business owners and also with franchisees, because it means that we can give them something really tangible and they can see that there's a real science and a structure behind what we do. And we're not just coming in and saying, well, yes, I can help you grow your business, so that they can see that. And it also helps us do lots of other things. For example, with the clients that we work with on various membership programs that we have, we introduce a monthly theme, and we take that monthly theme from a section of the book. And then sometimes we'll expand it, and that's also going to form the basis perhaps of a revised edition of the book, because things change. We learn more, we keep learning as well, and therefore each month we are revisiting the book, thinking, is this still valid, and can we improve it?
So branching off of that, you mentioned perhaps writing a second edition. I'm curious, when you were first planning this book, were you accounting for sort of evergreen principles like that, or did you know you'd eventually have to end up changing it just by nature?
The book is essentially evergreen. The principles in there are all, I would say probably all of it is evergreen, so it will stand the test of time. But even so, there are ways that we are continually learning, because we are working with business owners all the time, and we are implementing these principles with business owners, and therefore we keep learning and improving. And one of the things, I do a podcast as well, and I interview entrepreneurs, and again, we're constantly feeding back into that, and we then have more examples, for example, that we could bring into another edition. Or we might say, well, maybe the next book would be with a slightly different target audience, because this book was aimed at the business owner themselves, but maybe it would be appropriate to have one that's more aimed at people within the business, the team, as to how to take some of these principles. So it would be perhaps just focusing maybe more on the 90-day planning aspect itself, but understanding why that's important and how to implement it really well. But all of those, I don't know whether we're going to do that or not, but that's how the next edition might look if we were to do one.
I mean, hey, it's great that you have that in mind, and that you're kind of thinking ahead of what might need to be updated moving forward. It's so important to stay current, and everything. It's great that you knew that there was going to be some evergreen principles in there. There's a lot of people who make that mistake, right? They mention a specific event that's no longer relevant, or they would later on date them. If you're mentioning something that happened years ago, somebody picks it up now and be like, oh, maybe I don't want to follow this advice if it was written so long ago. It's amazing that you definitely kept it evergreen, and that's going to be relevant for years to come. One thing I kind of want to draw upon what you said is the idea of reaching a new target audience. I recently wrote a book, and I wrote a blog post recently, and in that blog post I mentioned, you don't write for everybody. You write for one person or somebody, right? You want to target it to that person, because the more you speak to that person's specific needs, the more use they're going to find out of that book, and the more widespread it will become. So I'm glad that you kind of had that in mind moving forward, and also when planning the book. What kind of steps did you take as you were writing this first book to make sure that it did match that initial target audience in terms of language or layout? Was it targeted to everybody, or more so a specific niche? What did you think?
Our specific niche is typically business owners that have already has some success with their business. Maybe they've got to the point where they've at least got 3 or 4 people in their team, something like that. But equally, they're typically not the big businesses. So typically up to 30, 40, 50 employees. That's our range. And what we've then been able to do within the book and the systems that we help business owners to do, that helps that particular group. And one of the big challenges that business owners face in that stage is transitioning from where the whole business is on their shoulders. They're driving everything because they're the founder. They started it and they've built it from scratch. And if they can't transition from driving the results and having to tell everybody what to do to having a team that is, and inspiring the team to drive the business themselves, and the founder takes a little bit more of a back seat or at least a higher level view, if they can't make that transition, then they're not going to be able to scale to the point where they've got teams of 25 people and a successful business moving on. So that's the key challenge that the business owners that we typically work with find, and hence the book is around that and the whole system is around that. And the 90-day planning is a really great way of involving the team and helping to take some of the things off the shoulders of the business owner.
I can definitely see, by writing it in that way and targeting it, so specifically, that's how you're able to answer the questions that needed to be answered, right? Just like I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, you find a need and you fill it in by writing your book. In addition to adding to your credibility, that's an amazing result of your book as well. I wonder, do you want to tell us a little bit about BizSmart too? Because I think that this obviously integrates a little bit more. If somebody right now heard what you just said about your target audience and they're thinking, that sounds like me, they might want to pick up your book, but they also might want to check out your other resources. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do and how you might be able to help those people who are listening today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's kind of you. We do a number of things, but essentially the core of it is around the 90-day planning. So we have we have a service that includes some bespoke software that helps business owners to track this. We also run 90-day planning events for the whole team within a business, and we guide them through having a great approach to coming out with a really strong set of priorities for the next 90 days that everybody's bought into at least in the senior leadership team of the business, that can then be consistently transferred down to other people within the business. So you've got that visibility, the clarity, and the consistency then that enables then the rhythm going forward. So that's one way that we work, and that's the sort of entry point to what we do. But we also run peer groups. We call them smart boards. They're a kind of mastermind group, and that's when we match ambitious business owners together in small groups, and we then work together to help to go on the journey. And that then means that we've got somebody else from a different industry that can help us address our problems or challenges, but also our opportunities, and can give a little bit of a sounding board type advice. And we have 2 levels of that. We have one for those that are aimed at the first transition, which is really going from being a solopreneur to having a team and putting it and acting more as a managing director. And that's the first group, and they're typically for business owners with up to 10 employees. And then we have another level, which we call CEO Mastery, which is the transition the business owner needs to make that I was talking about before, where they're transitioning from being the managing director and the operational type director to becoming a CEO, and then they're building a senior leadership team in place behind them. So we have 2 levels of those. That's that, and as well as doing some one-to-one work and specific strategy sort of type advice. But those are a couple of the key services that we do.
Sounds like you have a little bit for everybody, right? No matter what it is that you might need, you have a little bit of services for many different people, including teamwork and one-on-one type stuff and all different ranges. So hey, if you're listening today, want to know more about it, we're going to put some links in the chat and all of that later on. First, though, I also just wanted to kind of mention, sort of what's next for you then. You have your book, you have your business, you're considering perhaps maybe writing a new version of the book. I'm wondering, is there anything else in the meantime that maybe you're kind of thinking about, moving forward?
So I think a new book might be in the pipeline. But certainly the software that I mentioned is one of the key things that we're working on to support our franchisees. So we're trying to build our network of franchisees within the UK particularly, and who knows, maybe further afield. But the Smart 90 service is something that anybody can take on around the world. We can deliver that entirely remotely, and that's something that we certainly want to build. So we're building in AI as is obviously the buzzword at the minute, and everybody's talking about AI. We've had AI within the software from fairly early days, and we're building that in now with the aim that really it is a complete resource. It's not just a 90-day planning and a to-do list kind of type thing or a system like that, but it's got everything in it. So all of the help files from the book, there's AI in it that you can ask it questions about how we do various things within business. It's also got some of the advice from the entrepreneurs that we interview in that resource as well. So over time, that will grow and grow and grow and become almost like your companion on business, and you won't need a business coach like me anymore. You'll just be able to do it all through the system.
Well, I'd hate to hear that, right? You still want to, hear it from you. But hey, and you're not wrong in saying that, AI is kind of taking over in many different ways. But I'm glad that you're, kind of touching upon that, because maybe that's something else you want to include in the second book, right? Like the way that now you can use these easy, simple tools, whereas maybe the first book didn't quite touch upon that sort of thing. So just other elements to consider, moving forward.
Yes, I think that's right. And when you talk about evergreen type content, when we're things that will change will be things like technology will change very rapidly, but the underlying principles as to the thinking you need to go through probably won't, because the thinking of, if you've got tasks, for example, that you need to do on a regular basis, then the idea of finding ways to streamline those and automate those, and the thinking you go through, that won't change. You still need to think about how do we take some of these things and make them more efficient, but the tactic as to how you're going to do it will differ. And as we get more automation, more AI, then there'll be different ways, and there'll be ways that neither of us will even be able to dream of now that will come in the future. But the underlying principles of how to build a successful business, or how to write a great book, or as long as books continue to exist and content continues to exist, those sort of the thinking you need to go through will still be the same, but the execution bit might change depending on what technology or what resources are around that have improved.
Yeah, thanks for offering those tips. I think that's something that a lot of our listeners today can learn from, especially as they're planning their books and getting into the writing, is finding ways to make what you want it to say last the test of time, right? No matter what the different applications might be, ways you could still apply it, which is amazing that you were able to do that. So that's great. I'm curious, as we start to wrap up today, do you have any last bits of advice that you might want to offer to our audience, to our listeners, anybody wanting to write their books or perhaps follow in your footsteps? Because they all have their own businesses too. They want to promote it. They want to find a way to maybe integrate a new book into it. What kind of tips would you offer somebody who might be inspired by what you shared today?
Yeah, I think don't be put off by thinking it's an enormous task. It's a case of thinking about what is the end game? What am I trying to get to? Is that going to really help me in my business? And if that pull is strong enough, then break it down one step at a time. And that's probably one of the things that I've learned from some of the other things I've done in my life, like building a house. I had no idea how to build a house, but I knew what the end result was that I wanted. And then what was important was the roadmap. And we ended up with a timber framed house, so the structure was there. But then essentially I had a kind of a roadmap, which is a bit like a checklist. It was a directional, do this first, and then you need to do that. But I'm only talking about 2 pages of bullet points to build a house, because you don't need all the detail. You don't need to worry about the final fittings when you're doing the foundations. You need to think about the foundations first, and you can research how you need to do the foundations and get that done correctly. And then you'd say, oh, well, the next step is to maybe get the structure up for the timber frame. So how do we make sure that works? And as long as you go one step at a time and you address each challenge, and don't give yourself send yourself mad by trying to think about every single eventuality that could ever possibly happen. And you just do one step at a time, work out what the hurdles are, what needs to be done, what's the next step that you might need to think ahead for. And it's the same, and it's the same with writing a book. It's the same with running a business. It's the same with probably anything worthwhile that you're trying to do. Is have the confidence that you can do it, because basically if somebody else can do it, it probably means that you can do it. So if you want it enough, just break it down, work out what the next step is, and go for it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, again, another amazing insight that, I think everybody today can kind of take all these different tips that you've offered and put it into their own checklist now too, and kind of make sure they're implementing it too. There's so many different things that you've shared that are going to apply to everybody, not just business people, but writers, everybody else. So thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. Well, everybody, today, I think that pretty much wraps up our conversation with Kevin Brent. His systematic approach to scaling businesses through the framework he built offers incredible insights for anybody looking to grow their business or their life sustainably. Remember, success isn't about quick fixes, as we talked about. It's about doing it step by step, really thinking about it, improving yourself along the way. And, if you ever want to learn more about Kevin's work, you can visit his website, which we're going to put into the links of this podcast today. Also, be sure to check out the Scale-Up System, an amazing, incredible resource to learn more about his frameworks. And also, don't forget to check out Authors on Mission as well. If you're looking to write your own book, don't think you have the time, you want a little bit of insight and targeting its right audience, whatever it is you need, we're here to help you along the way. We're an amazing team. So hopefully you've been inspired by our stories today and are hoping to take another step forward. Other than that, until next time, keep pursuing your mission to become an expert in your field, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, everyone. And Kevin, thanks for joining us.
Danielle, thank you very much indeed for inviting me.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have an amazing night.
This is Danielle Hutchinson reminding you that somewhere, someone needs the book that only you can write. Visit authorsonmission.com to start your legacy. Until next time, keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep thinking in chapters. Have a great day.